Sometimes the life you run from follows you deeper than any forest can hide you. For 23 years, Hennie Chalk lived in the Idaho wilderness with nothing but what she could carry. Most folks in Timber Ridge knew her as the woman who slept under tarps and traded firewood for canned goods. She'd made peace with being forgotten. Then a charity raffle brought her name up at the volunteer fire hall. She'd won an abandoned storage unit nobody wanted. Inside that rusted container was a pile of junk. Broken chairs, waterlogged books, forgotten belongings. But buried beneath it all was one photograph that made her hands shake. A little girl standing on a porch. The girl was her. How did her past end up locked in a storage unit when she'd spent decades running from it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air carried the scent of pine and wet earth as Hennie Chalk crouched beside Clearwater Creek, washing her hands in water so cold it made her knuckles ache. She'd been awake since before dawn, same as always, her internal clock tuned to the rhythms of the forest rather than any man-made device. Her camp sat tucked beneath a rocky overhang, about 3 miles north of Timber Ridge, hidden well enough that even the occasional hiker never stumbled across it. She'd chosen this spot carefully when she first arrived 23 years ago. The overhang provided shelter from rain and snow. The creek offered fresh water year-round. A stand of Douglas firs blocked the worst of the winter wind, and in summer their shade kept the temperature bearable. She'd learned to read the forest's moods, to anticipate weather changes by the behavior of birds and the smell of the air. Her possessions fit into a single canvas rucksack, patched so many times the original fabric barely showed through. Inside, a wool blanket, a tarp, a hunting knife, a tin cup, matches wrapped in wax paper, a coil of paracord and a change of clothes. Everything else she needed she found or made. She knew which plants were edible, which streams ran clean, where to set snares for rabbits when winter hunger bit too deep. The people of Timber Ridge had grown accustomed to her presence over the years. She wasn't the town eccentric exactly, more like a ghost that occasionally took solid form. She came down from the mountain once or twice a week, always quiet, always self-contained. She'd trade firewood or help with odd jobs in exchange for canned goods, flour, salt, sometimes a warm meal eaten quickly before disappearing back into the trees. Gus Mercer ran the general store on Main Street, a weathered building that had stood since the 1940s. Gus himself was in his 70s now, moving slower than he used to but still sharp as a tack. He'd been one of the first people Hennie met when she arrived, and he'd never pressed her with questions. She appreciated that more than she could say. "Morning, Hennie," he'd say when she pushed through the door, the bell overhead jingling. "Morning, Gus." Her voice always came out rusty from disuse. She'd set her bundle of kindling by the counter. Gus would inspect it with the same care he'd shown the first time, though they both knew by now that her wood was always dry and well split. Then he'd nod, pull out his ledger and mark down a credit. She'd gather what she needed from the shelves, never taking more than she'd earned, and leave with a brief nod. Sometimes Deputy Tom Farrell would be there, picking up coffee or chatting with Gus. Tom was younger, early 30s, with an earnest face and eyes that seemed to see more than most. He'd been with the sheriff's department for about 5 years, and unlike some of the other officers, he never treated Hennie like a problem to be solved. "You doing all right up there?" he'd ask occasionally. "Doing fine. Winter's coming on hard this year. You need anything, you let us know." She'd nod, knowing she wouldn't ask, but appreciating the offer nonetheless. The truth was, Hennie had chosen this life deliberately. It wasn't poverty that drove her to the woods, though that's what most people assumed. It was safety. Out here, no one could hurt her. No one could get close enough to matter. The forest asked nothing of her except attention and respect, and in return, it gave her everything she needed. She couldn't remember exactly when she'd arrived in Timber Ridge. The years before that were a blur of hitchhiking, temporary jobs, cheap motels, always moving, never settling. But something about this place had felt different. The mountains rose up like protective walls. The forest was dense enough to disappear into, And the people, while curious, respected boundaries. She'd been in her late 30s then, though she looked older. Life on the road had carved lines into her face and silvered her hair prematurely. Now, in her early 60s, she moved with the careful economy of someone who'd learned to conserve energy, to work with her body's limitations rather than against them. The storage unit win had come as a complete surprise. She didn't even remember buying a raffle ticket, but apparently she had. Someone at the volunteer fire hall had tracked her down through Gus, who'd sent word up with a hiker he knew sometimes crossed near her camp. "You won something," the message said. "Come to the fire hall." She'd almost ignored it. Prizes and winnings belonged to people with addresses, with places to put things. What would she do with whatever it was? But winter was approaching, and she needed supplies. Maybe she could sell whatever she'd won, use the money for food and gear. Vernon Quick ran the storage facility on Route 7, about 2 miles outside town. The place consisted of a dozen metal units arranged in 2 rows, most of them rented by locals, who needed space for old furniture, seasonal equipment, or things they couldn't quite bring themselves to throw away. Vernon was a thin man in his 60s, with a permanent squint from years of working outdoors. "You're Hennie Chalk?" He'd asked when she showed up at his office, a small trailer parked at the entrance to the facility. "I am." "Well, congratulations. Unit 7's yours. Been paid up for years, but the owner passed away and the trust finally released it for the raffle." He'd pulled out a key ring, selected one, and handed it to her. "It's got some stuff in it. You can keep what you want, dump the rest. No rush, but I'll need it cleared out eventually." They'd walked together to Unit 7. It sat at the end of the second row, its metal door streaked with rust and brown from weathering. Blackberry vines had grown up around the base, thorny tendrils reaching toward the padlock, as if trying to keep whatever was inside sealed away forever. Vernon had helped her pull the vines clear, revealing the lock. The key had stuck at first, the mechanism corroded from years of moisture and neglect. But with some effort it turned, and the lock fell open with a heavy click. "Want me to help you open it?" Vernon had asked. "I can manage." He'd nodded and walked back toward his trailer, leaving her alone with the unit. Hennie had stood there for a long moment, key in hand, something cold settling in her stomach. She couldn't have explained the feeling, the sense that opening this door would change something fundamental. But she'd dismissed it as foolishness. It was just a storage unit, just someone's old junk. She'd gripped the handle and pulled. The door resisted, then gave way with a screech of metal on metal. The smell hit her first, mildew and dust, and the particular mustiness of things left too long in darkness. As her eyes adjusted, she saw the chaos inside. Furniture stacked haphazardly, cardboard boxes sagging from water damage, plastic tubs with cracked lids, a standing lamp with no shade, a rolled-up rug, piles of books with warped pages. It looked like the accumulated debris of an entire life packed away and forgotten. She'd stepped inside, carefully navigating around a broken chair. The unit was maybe 10 feet deep and 8 feet wide, packed nearly to the ceiling in places. Someone had tried to organize it once, she could see that. But time and moisture had undone whatever order existed, leaving everything in a jumbled heap. Near the back, she spotted a wooden crate with rope handles. Something about it drew her attention. She worked her way over, moving boxes and bags aside, and knelt beside it. The wood was water-stained but solid, the lid held down by a simple hook latch. She'd opened it. Inside, wrapped in what had once been a white cloth, now yellowed and brittle, was a photograph in a simple wooden frame. She'd lifted it carefully, bringing it into the light from the doorway. The image showed a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing on the porch of a white farmhouse. The girl wore a simple cotton dress with small flowers on it. Behind her, a dogwood tree was in bloom. In the doorway of the house, barely visible, was the shadow of a woman. Hennie's hands had begun to shake. She knew that porch. She knew that dress. She knew that tree. The girl in the photograph was her. The realization had hit her like a physical blow. She'd sat back hard, the photograph clutched in her hands, her breath coming short and fast. This was impossible. The farmhouse in the picture had burned down when she was 12 years old. Everything from that life was supposed to be gone, destroyed, buried under years of deliberate forgetting. But here it was. Here she was, frozen in time, standing on a porch that shouldn't exist in a photograph that shouldn't have survived. Vernon had noticed her distress when she stumbled out of the unit, the photograph still in her hands. "You all right?" he'd called, starting toward her. "I'm fine." The words came out strangled. "I just need some air." "You want some water?" "I'm fine," she'd forced herself to breathe, to stand straight. "Thank you. I'll come back another time." She'd walked away quickly, the photograph pressed against her chest, Vernon's concerned voice fading behind her. She hadn't stopped until she reached the forest, her forest, where the trees stood like sentries and the ground felt solid beneath her feet. That night, she'd sat by her campfire, unable to sleep, the photograph propped against a rock where the firelight could reach it. She'd stared at that little girl's face, trying to reconcile her with the woman she'd become. The girl looked happy in the picture, or at least content. There was no fear in her eyes, no shadow of what was coming. Hennie had spent 23 years building a life where the past couldn't reach her. She'd buried memories so deep they'd become almost dreamlike, more feeling than fact. She'd convinced herself that if she didn't think about it, didn't name it, didn't give it space in her mind, then it would cease to exist. But the past, it seemed, had other plans. Hennie returned to the storage unit the next morning. She'd barely slept, the photograph haunting her through the long night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that porch, felt phantom memories stirring like creatures waking from hibernation. By dawn, she'd made her decision. Running from this wouldn't work anymore. Whatever was in that unit, whatever truth it held, she needed to face it. The walk from her camp to Route 7 took about an hour. The morning was cold, frost still clinging to the shadowed places, her breath visible in the air. She carried her rucksack, thinking she might need it to transport anything useful she found. Practical thinking, she told herself. Treat this like any other salvage operation. But her hands trembled as she unlocked the unit again. In daylight, the chaos looked even more overwhelming. She stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying the wreckage of someone's life, then forced herself to step inside. She'd start systematically, she decided. Sort everything into categories. Furniture in one area, papers in another, personal items in a third. Make sense of the disorder. She began with the boxes nearest the door. The first held old kitchen items, chipped plates, tarnished silverware, a set of measuring cups. Nothing remarkable. The second contained linens, mostly ruined by mildew, the fabric disintegrating at her touch. The third was heavier, filled with books. She pulled one out. The pages were swollen with moisture, the text barely legible, but she could make out the title, The Poetry of Mary Oliver. Something about seeing that name made her chest tight. She knew that name. Had someone read those poems to her once? She set the book aside and continued digging. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in plastic that had mostly kept the water out, was a leather journal. The cover was water-stained but intact, the pages inside still readable. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, slanted slightly to the right, written in blue ink that had faded to grey in places. The first entry was dated June 1983. "I don't know if she'll ever read this," it began. "But I have to write it down. I have to keep record of what's happening, in case someday she needs to know the truth. Catherine is trying so hard to protect the girl, but I can see how scared she is. We all are." Hennie's heart hammered against her ribs. Catherine. That name unlocked something, a door in her mind she'd kept bolted shut. Catherine was her mother's name. She flipped through the journal, scanning entries. The writer signed themselves only as L at the end of each entry. They wrote about the girl, never using a name, and about Catherine's fear, about watching the situation deteriorate, about feeling helpless. One entry from July caught her eye. "Catherine showed me the bruises today. She's running out of places to hide them. She says she's going to leave him, take the girl and disappear. I told her I'd help any way I could." Robert agrees. "We can't let this continue." Hennie sat down hard on a plastic storage tub, the journal open in her lap. Bruises. leaving. The fragments of memories she'd been suppressing began pushing through her defenses. She remembered fear. She remembered her mother's face, the way she'd smile, but it never reached her eyes. She remembered raised voices, doors slamming. Hiding in her closet with her hands over her ears, she forced herself to keep reading. The entries grew more urgent through July and into August. Then they stopped abruptly. The last entry was dated August 15th, 1983. It happened. God help us all, it happened. Catherine is gone. The girl survived, but I don't know how to tell her the truth. How do you explain to a child that her mother is dead? That her father... No, I can't write it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Robert and I have decided to keep her safe, the only way we know how. We'll bury the truth as deep as we can. Let her forget. Let her have some kind of life. The journal trembled in Hennie's hands. Dead. Her mother was dead. She'd known that, somewhere in the locked-away places of her mind. But seeing it written down made it real in a way that memories couldn't. She set the journal aside carefully and moved deeper into the unit. Driven now by something she couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or anger, or just the need to know. In a wooden crate marked HM as personal, she found a child's music box. It was tarnished silver, about the size of her palm, with a delicate pattern of flowers engraved on the lid. She lifted it, wound the key on the bottom, and opened it. The melody that emerged was thin and tinny, but she recognized it instantly. Beautiful dreamer. The notes pierced through her carefully constructed walls like arrows, and suddenly she was 7 years old again, lying in a narrow bed in a room with yellow wallpaper, her mother sitting beside her, winding this same music box, singing along in a soft voice, "Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee." Hennie's eyes burned. She snapped the music box shut, cutting off the melody, but it was too late. The memory was loose, and others followed. Her mother's hands, worn from work, but gentle when they brushed her hair. The smell of bread baking. The way sunlight filtered through curtains in the morning. The small moments of safety that existed between the storms. She remembered the storms too, now that the door was open. Her father's voice loud and cruel. Her mother's quiet crying in the kitchen. The feeling of being very small and very helpless. Watching her mother try to hold their world together with shaking hands, and she remembered the fire. The memory came back in fragments, like a broken mirror reflecting disconnected pieces of that night. Smoke, screaming, someone pulling her from the house, her aunt, yes, Aunt Lorraine, being carried to a truck, watching flames pour from the windows. Her mother's voice calling her name, then nothing. Just silence and smoke, and the terrible understanding that her mother wasn't coming out. Hennie stood abruptly, the music box falling from her hands. She couldn't breathe. The walls of the storage unit felt like they were closing in. She stumbled toward the door, gasping, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. Vernon must have seen her from his trailer. He came jogging over, concern written across his face. "Hennie, what's wrong? You need me to call someone?" "No." She held up a hand, bent over, forcing air into her lungs. "No, I'm all right." "You don't look all right. I just need a minute." He hovered uncertainly, then went back to his trailer and returned with a bottle of water. She took it gratefully, drank half of it in one go, let the cold liquid ground her back in her body. "Thank you," she managed. "That unit's got something bad in it?" Vernon asked carefully. "Just ghosts." She handed back the water bottle. "I'll be fine. I just need to sort through it slower." He nodded, clearly not convinced but willing to respect her space. "You need anything? I'm right there." "All right. All right." She waited until he'd returned to his trailer, then turned back to the unit. The music box lay on the ground, near the entrance where she'd dropped it. She picked it up, tucked it into her jacket pocket along with the photograph and the journal. These 3 things. These pieces of a past she'd tried to erase. Someone had saved them. Someone had stored them away, paid for this unit for years, and arranged for her to find them. Lorraine, her mother's sister. It had to be, but why? Why bring this back now after decades of silence? Hennie locked the unit and walked back toward town, her mind churning. She couldn't go back to her camp yet. She needed answers, and there was only one place in Timber Ridge where she might find them. The library was small, just 3 rooms in an old house on Maple Street, but it served the town well enough. And more importantly, it had internet access and someone who knew how to dig through records. Delia Parsons had run the Timber Ridge Historical Society for 30 years, and she spent most of her time at the library, researching local history and helping visitors trace their family trees. She was in her late 70s, sharp-eyed and sharp-minded, with a reputation for being able to find information most people thought was lost forever. Hennie pushed through the library door, the familiar smell of old books and wood polish washing over her. Delia looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face. "Hennie almost never came here. Hennie, what brings you in today?" Hennie approached the desk, pulled out the photograph, and set it down where Delia could see it. "I need to know about a fire," she said quietly. "Eastern Oregon, summer of 1983. A woman died. Her name was Catherine." Delia studied Hennie's face for a long moment, then looked down at the photograph. When she looked up again, her expression had softened with understanding. "That little girl," she said gently. "That's you, isn't it?" Hennie nodded. "All right," Delia said, pulling out a notepad. "Let's see what we can find." Hennie returned to the storage unit the following morning with renewed purpose. The conversation with Delia had been brief. She'd promised to research property fires in eastern Oregon during the early 1980s. But it had given Hennie something she hadn't realized she needed: permission to look backward. For so long, she'd treated her past like something toxic, untouchable. Now, with someone else willing to help carry the weight, it felt less dangerous. She approached the sorting differently this time, not as salvage, but as archaeology. Each item was a potential clue, a piece of the puzzle of who she'd been before she became Hennie Chalk. The furniture she moved aside quickly: a broken dresser, a dining chair with 3 legs, a coffee table with water damage. These were just things, holding no particular meaning, but the boxes of personal items she handled with care. Sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor of the unit and examining each object before deciding what to do with it. In one box, she found children's clothes carefully folded despite their age. Small dresses, corduroy pants, a winter coat with a fur-lined hood. She held up one dress, pale blue with white buttons, and something about it felt familiar. The fabric was soft from washing, worn thin in places. Had she worn this? Had her mother dressed her in it, buttoned those buttons, smoothed down the collar? Another box held school papers, worksheets with careful handwriting, spelling tests marked with red check marks, drawings in crayon. She pulled out one drawing and studied it. A house with a triangular roof, a tree beside it, 2 stick figures standing in front, one tall, one small. Above them, a sun with rays extending outward. At the bottom, in careful child's printing, "Me and Mama." The word "Mama" hit her harder than she expected. She'd stopped using that word so long ago, stopped letting herself think it, feel it, remember what it meant to have a mother who loved you. She set the drawing aside and pulled out another. This one showed 3 figures, 2 adults and a child. But the third figure, one of the adults, had been scribbled over violently with black crayon, obliterated until nothing showed through but an angry, dark mass. Hennie stared at it, her jaw tight. She didn't remember making this drawing, but she understood it perfectly. Even as a child, she'd known which parent was safe and which was the danger. A sound outside the unit made her look up. An older woman was approaching, walking with a slight limp, but moving with determined purpose. "Delia, thought I might find." "You here?" Delia said, a manila folder tucked under her arm. "I've got some information if you're ready for it." Hennie stood, brushing dust from her jeans. "That was quick." "I know where to look, and I had a feeling this was important." Delia glanced around the interior of the unit, taking in the organized chaos. "Mind if I come in?" "Please." They sat together on a relatively clear section of floor, Delia settling with a small grunt of effort. She opened the folder and pulled out several photocopied pages. "I found 3 significant fires in eastern Oregon during that time period," Delia said. Two were commercial properties, one was residential. The residential fire occurred on August 16th, 1983, at a property in Silverton. Does that name mean anything to you? Silverton. The word resonated like a struck bell. Yes, Hennie said quietly. Delia nodded and handed her a photocopied newspaper article. The headline read, "Tragic fire claims life of local woman, child survives." Hennie forced herself to read the text beneath. Catherine Madsen, 34, died in a house fire late Tuesday evening at her residence on County Road 47. The cause of the fire is under investigation, but appears to be electrical in nature. Madsen's daughter, Hannah, 12, escaped without serious injury. She is currently in the care of family members. Madsen was a third-grade teacher at Silverton Elementary and is survived by her daughter and her sister, Lorraine Madsen of Silverton. Hannah. Her real name was Hannah. Hannah May, actually, if the journal's notation was correct. Hannah May Madsen. She'd been someone with a real name, a real life, before she became Hennie Chalk. "There's more," Delia said gently, handing her another document. Property records show the house was owned jointly by Catherine Madsen and Lorraine Madsen. They inherited it from their parents in 1978. So Aunt Lorraine had been L in the journal. That made sense. "I also found this," Delia continued, pulling out another photocopy. "An obituary for Lorraine Madsen. She died in 2002 at the age of 73, pancreatic cancer. No surviving children, and the obituary mentions that she was preceded in death by her sister Catherine and is survived by a niece, Hannah, whereabouts unknown." Whereabouts unknown? Hennie had been so thoroughly lost by then that even her only living relative couldn't find her, or hadn't tried. Either possibility stung. "Thank you," Hennie said, her voice rough. "This helps. There's one more thing," Delia said. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The newspaper article mentions that the fire was investigated. I couldn't find the actual fire marshal's report, but I did find a follow-up article from 2 weeks later. It confirmed the electrical fault theory. But Hennie," she paused, 12-year-old children don't usually escape house fires without adults helping them. Someone got you out." "My aunt," Hennie said. "Lorraine. She pulled me out. I remember that now. Was she there when the fire started?" Hennie tried to pull the memory into focus, but it remained fragmented, more impression than detail. "I think so. There were people arguing, shouting, and then smoke, and Lorraine was there pulling me outside." "People arguing," Delia repeated carefully. "Before the fire?" Hennie met her eyes. "My father. He was there. I don't remember much about him, but I remember being afraid of him. And I remember the journal entry. Catherine was planning to leave him. The implications hung in the air between them. An abusive husband, a wife planning to escape, a suspicious fire. But the investigation had ruled it accidental, and everyone involved was either dead or vanished." "Do you remember your father's name?" Delia asked. Hennie shook her head. "Not yet, but maybe there's something in here that will help." She gestured to the boxes surrounding them. They spent the next hour searching together. Delia proved to be a skilled investigator, spotting details Hennie might have overlooked. In a box of books, she found a leather-bound photo album, its pages stuck together with moisture, but carefully separable. The photographs inside showed a young couple, Catherine and a tall man with dark hair and a beard. Early pictures showed them smiling, his arm around her shoulders. But as the album progressed, Catherine's smiles became more strained, more forced. The man's expression grew harder, his posture more aggressive, even in staged family photos. Near the end of the album, there were pictures of a little girl, Hannah, growing from toddler to child. In every picture with her father, she stood stiffly, not quite touching him, her smile uncertain. The last page held a single photograph, Catherine and Hannah together, no father in sight. They sat on the porch, the same porch from the photograph that had started all this. Catherine's arm was around Hannah's shoulders, both of them genuinely smiling. Behind them, someone had written in the margin, "Just us, summer 1983, just us." 2 words that spoke volumes about relief, about escape, about a moment of peace. "I think this is the answer you're looking for," Delia said softly, pointing to an inscription on the album's inside cover. Hennie read it. "To Catherine, all my love. James Wilder, 1971. James Wilder, her father's name. She tested it in her mind, waiting to see if it sparked recognition. It felt right in the way that nightmares feel right, terrifying but undeniable. "I'll see what I can find about James Wilder," Delia said. "If he was involved in the fire, there should be records, police reports, witness statements, something." The journal said Lorraine and someone named Robert decided to bury the truth, Hennie said. "Maybe they covered for him somehow. Or maybe they protected you from knowing the full story." Delia squeezed Hennie's hand briefly. Sometimes people make hard choices for what they think are good reasons. After Delia left, Hennie remained in the unit, surrounded by the pieces of Hannah Mae Wilder's life. She opened the music box again, let the melody play through twice, and this time didn't fight the memories that came with it. She was beginning to understand that remembering was the only way forward. 3 days later, Hennie was back at the storage unit when she discovered something that changed everything. She'd been working through a cardboard file box filled with papers, bills, receipts, insurance documents, when her fingers found something unusual at the bottom. A book, hollowed out in the center to create a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment was a bundle of letters tied together with string that had rotted almost through. She carried them carefully to the doorway, where the light was better, and untied the string, watching it disintegrate in her hands. The letters were addressed to various people, but all appeared to be correspondence between 2 parties. Someone who signed as L, Lorraine, she now knew, and someone who signed as RC. The earliest letter was dated December 1985, more than 2 years after the fire. She read through them in chronological order, her stomach growing tighter with each page. "Dear Robert," the first one began, "Hannah had another episode at the facility today. They're increasing her sessions with the therapist, but she won't talk about that night. Dr. Morrison says it's not uncommon for traumatized children to block out memories. Maybe that's for the best. What good would it do her to remember?" The letters continued, painting a picture of a girl bouncing between foster placements and group homes, unable to settle, unable to attach. Lorraine had tried to keep her, the letters revealed, but her own grief over Catherine's death and her guilt over what happened had made it impossible. Social services had deemed her unfit. Robert Carver, she discovered from the return addresses, wrote back regularly, urging Lorraine to tell Hannah the truth when she was old enough. He argued that lies, even protective ones, would do more harm than good in the long run. Lorraine disagreed. "The truth won't set her free," she wrote in 1986. "It will destroy her. She's already so fragile, Robert. If she knew what really happened, if she knew what James did and why we didn't tell the police, she'd never forgive us. Better to let her think it was an accident. Better to let her forget him entirely." Hennie's hands shook as she read. What James did. So it hadn't been an accident. The fire marshal's report was wrong, or had been deliberately falsified. A letter from 1989 mentioned Hannah running away from her group home. "She's 14 now," Lorraine wrote, "and she's learned that running is easier than staying. I recognize that pattern, Robert. I did the same thing after our parents died, but at least I knew who I was running from. Hannah doesn't even have that. She's running from ghosts." The final letter in the bundle was dated March 1990. Robert's handwriting was shaky, his words brief. "She's gone, Lorraine. Ran away again 2 weeks ago, and this time the social worker doesn't think she's coming back. Maybe you're right. Maybe she's better off not knowing. Maybe some truths are too heavy to carry. I'll keep paying for the storage unit like we agreed. When she's ready, if she's ever ready, it will be there." Hennie sat back against the metal wall of the unit, the letters scattered around her. A storage unit, paid for decades in advance, waiting for a girl who might never come back. Waiting for her? She tried to piece together her own timeline from what the letters revealed. She'd been in foster care from ages 12 to 17, cycling through placements, unable to bond, unable to trust. Then she'd run. That part matched her fragmented memories. Years of drifting, working cash jobs, sleeping rough, avoiding anyone who might ask questions or try to help. She'd taught herself to be invisible, to need nothing from anyone. And she'd done it so well that even her own aunt couldn't find her. The sound of a vehicle pulling up outside broke through her thoughts. She looked out to see a sheriff's department SUV parking near the unit. Deputy Tom Farrell climbed out, adjusting his hat. "Morning, Hennie," he called. "Vernon mentioned you've been spending a lot of time out here. Thought I'd check in, make sure everything's all right." She considered telling him to leave, that she was fine, that she didn't need checking on. But something about the letters, about the story of a girl who'd been too afraid to let anyone close, made her hesitate. "I'm going through old family belongings," she said instead. "It's more complicated than I expected." Tom approached slowly, respectfully. "Want to talk about it?" And to her surprise, she did. She found herself telling him about the fire, about discovering that her real name was Hannah, about the letters suggesting that her mother's death wasn't accidental. She didn't go into all the details, but she told him enough. Tom listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot to carry," he said finally. "And you've been carrying it alone." "I'm used to alone, I know. But maybe you don't have to be." He pulled out a small notebook. "If you want help tracking down information, legal records, old police reports, that kind of thing, I can make some calls. Courthouse has archives going back decades. Might be something there." Hennie studied him, looking for the catch, the angle. But his expression was open, genuine. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I've watched you keep the whole world at arm's length for 5 years now. Maybe it's time to let someone in, even just a little." She wanted to say no. Every instinct told her to maintain distance, to handle this herself. But the letters had shown her something important. She'd been running her whole life, and it hadn't made her safe. It had just made her alone. "All right," she said quietly. "I'd appreciate the help." Tom nodded, making notes in his book. "Your mother's name was Catherine Madsen. Fire was in Silverton, Oregon, August 1983. I'll start there." He paused, pen hovering over paper. "What was your father's name?" "James Wilder." Something flickered in Tom's expression, recognition maybe, or concern. "I'll look into him too." After Tom left, Hennie continued sorting through the unit with new energy. If Lorraine had left clues about what really happened, they were in here somewhere. She just had to find them. In a banker's box labeled legal, she found more documents. A restraining order application dated July 1983, just a month before the fire. Catherine Madsen seeking protection from James Wilder. The allegations listed made Hennie's chest ache. Verbal abuse, intimidation, threats of violence, isolating behavior, control of finances. Catherine had been trapped. She'd tried to protect herself and her daughter legally, but then, according to a handwritten note in the margin, in what Hennie now recognized as Lorraine's writing, she'd changed her mind, or been convinced to change it. Catherine decided not to file, the note read. He promised he'd get help. She believed him. God help us, she believed him. 1 month later, Catherine was dead. Hennie found a postcard tucked between the pages of the legal documents. It showed a pastoral scene, mountains, a lake, trees. On the back, addressed to Hannah, C.O. Willow Creek Group Home, was a short message. "Thinking of you always. One day you'll understand. L. Willow Creek." She remembered that place, or thought she did. Gray walls, narrow beds, the smell of industrial cleaner. She'd been 14, maybe 15. The postcard had been the only mail she'd ever received there. She turned it over again, studying the front. The caption read, "Silverton, Oregon, where beauty grows." Lorraine had sent her a piece of home, a connection to the place where everything had fallen apart. At the time, Hennie would have thrown it away, wanting nothing to do with the past. But someone at the group home must have saved it, included it in her file, and eventually it had ended up here. Everything always ended up here, in this rusted storage unit that Lorraine had maintained like a shrine, or like a time capsule. or like a confession waiting to be heard. Hennie packed the letters, the restraining order application, and the postcard carefully into her rucksack. Tonight, she'd read through them again at her camp. She'd start filling in the gaps, preparing herself for whatever truth was still waiting to be discovered, because she understood now that Lorraine hadn't stored these things out of nostalgia. She'd stored them as evidence, a record of what happened, preserved until the day Hannah was strong enough to face it. That day had finally come. Delia arrived at the storage unit 4 days later, carrying a worn leather briefcase and wearing an expression that Hennie had learned meant she'd found something significant. The older woman settled herself on an overturned plastic crate that Hennie had repurposed as a makeshift seat, opened the briefcase with deliberate care, and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I've been doing some digging," Delia said without preamble, "and I need you to prepare yourself, because what I found is going to be difficult." Hennie set down the box she'd been sorting through and gave Delia her full attention. "I'm ready." Delia pulled out a legal document, its edges worn from age and handling. Property deed for the farmhouse in Silverton, dated 1978. The property was owned jointly by Lorraine Madsen and Robert Carver. Not Catherine, but the newspaper said Catherine lived there. She did, but she didn't own it. According to these records, Catherine and her daughter were living in the house that Lorraine and Robert owned together. Lorraine was Catherine's older sister by 8 years. Robert Carver was, she consulted another document, pastor of Silverton Community Church from 1976 to 1995. He and Lorraine appear to have had a close relationship, though I found no marriage certificate. Hennie absorbed this information, fitting it into the puzzle. They were protecting Catherine, giving her a place where James couldn't claim ownership. That would be my guess. Delia pulled out another sheet. Here's where it gets more complicated. Newspaper clipping from the Silverton Gazette, August 17th, 1983. The day after the fire. Hennie took the photocopy and read. The article was more detailed than the first one she'd seen, including quotes from the fire marshal and witnesses. What caught her attention was a single line near the end. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices from the residents approximately an hour before the fire was discovered. Fire Marshal Kenneth Briggs confirmed that the investigation is ongoing. Though preliminary findings suggest an electrical fault in the home's outdated wiring, raised voices, Hennie repeated. "Keep reading." Delia handed her another clipping, this one from 2 weeks later. Follow-up article. The second article was shorter, announcing that the investigation had concluded. Accidental fire caused by faulty wiring in the kitchen. Catherine Madsen had been alone in the house when the fire started. Her daughter Hannah had been staying with relatives that evening and was not present. The case was closed, but that wasn't true. Hennie remembered being there. She remembered smoke and screaming and being pulled from the house. She remembered it clearly now. The memory is no longer soft and dreamlike, but sharp as broken glass. "They lied," she said flatly. "The official report is a lie." "It appears that way, yes." Delia's voice was gentle but firm. "I found something else. Death certificate for Catherine Madsen." She handed it over. "Cause of death listed as smoke inhalation. But there's a notation from the coroner. See there?" Hennie squinted at the small print at the bottom of the certificate. "Contusions consistent with recent physical trauma. Documentation recommended. Catherine was injured before the fire killed her," Delia said. "The coroner noted it, but apparently it never went anywhere. No police report, no follow-up investigation." The implications settled over Hennie like a heavy blanket. Her father had hurt her mother before setting the fire. This wasn't just arson. It was murder. "There's more," Delia continued, pulling out a photocopied census record. "I went back and tracked your family through census data. 1980 census shows Catherine Wilder, James Wilder, and daughter Hannah living in Portland. Catherine's occupation listed as teacher, James listed as unemployed. Wilder was my mother's married name then? Yes. But here's what's interesting. I found divorce records. Catherine filed for divorce from James in March 1982. It was finalized in September 1982, 11 months before the fire. She reverted to her maiden name, Madsen. Moved to Silverton with you, started teaching at the elementary school. James wasn't supposed to be in her life anymore. Hennie felt something cold solidify in her chest. But he came back, Delia confirmed. And based on the restraining order application you found, he'd been harassing her for months before the fire. They sat in silence for a moment, the pieces of the tragedy assembling themselves into a coherent, terrible picture. A woman trying to escape an abusive marriage, a man who wouldn't let her go, a legal system that couldn't protect her, and a fire that wasn't an accident. Why did Lorraine and Robert cover it up? Hennie finally asked. If they knew what James did, why not go to the police? I can only speculate, Delia said carefully. But I found this. She pulled out one more document, a transcript badly faded. Child Protective Services interview with Hannah Wilder, conducted August 18th, 1983, 2 days after the fire. Hennie took it with shaking hands. The transcript was brief, the questions gentle but probing, and there in the middle was her own voice from 30 years ago, preserved in typed text. Q. Hannah, can you tell us what you remember about the night of the fire? I was in the truck. Aunt Lorraine put me in the trucking before the fire started? I don't know. There was yelling. Daddy was there. Then he wasn't. Then the fire. Q. Your father was at the house. I think so. I don't remember. Can I go now? Could just a few more questions, sweetheart. Did you see your father leave? I don't know. Everything's mixed up. I want my mama. Q. I know, honey. We're going to take care of you. Where's my mama? Why can't I see her? The transcript ended with a note from the interviewer. Child appears confused and traumatized. Memories of the event are fragmented and unreliable. Recommend ongoing therapy and placement with family services. Hennie set the paper down, her vision blurred with tears she'd thought she'd finished crying years ago. I tried to tell them. I tried to say he was there, but you were 12 and traumatized, and your testimony was considered unreliable. Children's memories after trauma often are. Delia reached over and squeezed Hennie's hand briefly. This isn't your fault. You were a child trying to process something no child should have to witness. Lorraine knew, Hennie said, her voice rough. She knew I'd seen him there. That's why she and Robert decided to bury it. They thought they were protecting me from having to testify, from having to relive it over and over in court, possibly. Or they were afraid that without concrete evidence, James would go free anyway and come looking for you. Delia gathered her documents carefully. Either way, they made a choice. They let the official story stand, and they kept you as far from the truth as they could. After Delia left, Hennie sat alone in the storage unit, holding the transcript of her childhood testimony. The words swam before her eyes. Daddy was there. Then he wasn't. Then the fire. She remembered more now. Not everything, but enough. She remembered being in Robert's truck, Lorraine holding her, telling her to stay put. She remembered seeing her father's silhouette against the house, backlit by flames that were already consuming the kitchen. She remembered him looking toward the truck, toward her, his expression unreadable in the dancing light. And then he turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving his daughter orphaned and his wife dead. He'd known she was watching. He'd known she'd survived. And he'd left anyway. The question that haunted her now was simple and terrible. Where had he gone? James Wilder had murdered his ex-wife and walked away from the scene. Somewhere he'd built a new life. Changed his name, maybe. Started over. While Hennie had spent 23 years hiding in the wilderness, had he been living comfortably, free from consequences? She thought about the private investigator reports Lorraine had mentioned in her letter. Those might still be in the unit somewhere, buried in the boxes she hadn't yet sorted through. She spent the rest of the afternoon searching with renewed purpose, working through containers methodically, checking every pocket of every jacket, every envelope in every box. As the afternoon light began to fade, she finally found what she was looking for, a manila envelope tucked inside a leather satchel that had been hidden under a pile of old quilts. The envelope was addressed to Lorraine Madsen, return address from Cascade Investigations, Portland, Oregon. Inside were reports dated from 1991 through 2001, each one documenting James Wilder's movements and activities. Hennie carried the envelope outside, where the light was better, and read through them carefully. The earliest report, from 1991, located James living under his real name in Seattle, working construction. The investigator noted that James appeared to have no criminal record and was living quietly, keeping to himself. Subsequent reports tracked him moving around the Pacific Northwest. Spokane in 1993, Bend, Oregon in 1995, Missoula, Montana in 1998, never staying long, always working manual labor jobs, always alone. The final report, dated November 2001, placed him in northern Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, working at a lumber yard. The investigator had included a photograph. Hennie stared at the image. James had aged, his dark hair gone gray, his face weathered by outdoor work, but she recognized him. Something about the set of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders. This was her father. The report concluded with a note. Subject continues to maintain low profile. No known contact with family or former associates. Recommend continued monitoring if client wishes, but there were no more reports after that one. Lorraine had died in 2002, just a few months after receiving this final update. The investigation had ended with her death. Hennie studied the photograph as the sun set, shadows lengthening across the storage facility. James Wilder had been in northern Idaho in 2001. She'd arrived in Timber Ridge in 2002. They'd been in the same region for more than 20 years, living separate lives, neither knowing the other was near, or had he known. The thought sent ice down her spine. Had he been looking for her all these years? Had he somehow tracked her to Idaho? She needed to find out if he was still here, and if he was, she needed to decide what she was going to do about it. Tom Farrell appeared at the storage unit the next morning with coffee and information. Hennie had spent the night at her camp, sleepless, staring at the photograph of James Wilder until she'd memorized every line of his face. When she heard Tom's vehicle pull up, she was already halfway through sorting another box. Running on nervous energy and determination. Brought you something, Tom said, handing her a disposable cup. Black, no sugar. Gus said that's how you take it on the rare occasions you come into the store. She accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. October mornings were getting harsh, frost forming on the ground before dawn. Thank you. I also brought this. He pulled out a folder from his vehicle. Found some things you should see. Can we talk inside? They settled in the unit, Tom on the plastic crate, Hennie on an old wooden chair she'd deemed stable enough to use. He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. I put in some calls to colleagues in Oregon, he began. Pulled the official fire investigation report from 1983, the one that declared it accidental. He handed her a copy. Read it and tell me what jumps out at you. Hennie scanned the report. Technical language about burn patterns, electrical systems, points of origin. But one section made her pause. It says the fire started in the kitchen, in the electrical outlet behind the refrigerator. Faulty wiring caused a spark that ignited nearby curtains. Right. Now look at this. Tom handed her a second document. Fire Marshal's preliminary notes, taken at the scene the night of the fire. This is the raw data before the official report was written. She compared the two documents. The preliminary notes mentioned multiple points of origin, kitchen and bedroom. They mentioned an accelerant smell near the bedroom door. They included witness statements about raised voices and an unknown vehicle leaving the property shortly before flames were visible. These don't match, she said. No, they don't. The official report left out everything that suggested deliberate arson. It focused only on the kitchen fire and ruled it accidental. Tom's expression was grim. Someone cleaned up the investigation. Robert Carver, Hennie said quietly. He was a pastor, well respected in the community. The kind of person who could make phone calls, ask favors, convince people to look the other way. That would be my guess. He and your aunt probably thought they were protecting you. Kept you from having to testify. Kept your father's name out of it. Let everyone believe it was just a tragic accident. Tom pulled out another sheet. But here's the thing, Hennie. Murder doesn't have a statute of limitations. If we could prove James Wilder deliberately set that fire, he could still be prosecuted. After 30 years. After 100 years, if the evidence is solid enough. He met her eyes. The question is, do you want to pursue this? Hennie took a long drink of coffee, buying herself time to think. Did she want to pursue it? Did she want to drag the past into the present, put her father on trial, force herself to relive that night in a courtroom? I don't know yet, she said honestly. First, I need to know if he's still alive. If he's still in Idaho, Tom nodded slowly. I may have information about that. It's not official and I can't confirm it without proper cause, but he hesitated. There's a logging operation up near Bonner's Ferry, about 40 miles north of here. They hire a lot of older guys, people who want to work off the books or under aliases. Cash jobs, no questions asked. Hennie's heart rate picked up. You think he's there? I think it's possible. One of the guys who works there goes by Jim Walker. He's the right age, fits the general description. Keeps to himself, been there about 6 years. Tom's expression was careful, neutral. Could be nothing. Could be your father. I don't know. Jim Walker. James Wilder. The names were similar enough that it could be deliberate or it could be coincidence. I need to see him, Hennie said. I need to know. That's what I figured you'd say. Tom stood, stretching. But we do this carefully. If it is him, and if we want to build a case, we can't spook him. Can't let him know we're looking. How do we do that? Leave it with me. I'll make some inquiries. Try to get confirmation on his identity before we approach. He paused at the entrance of the unit. In the meantime, keep going through this stuff. If Lorraine saved private investigator reports, she might have saved other evidence too. Anything that connects James to the fire, anything that contradicts the official story, we need it. After Tom left, Hennie returned to her search with renewed focus. She needed evidence, something concrete that would prove what she remembered, what she knew in her bones to be true. She found it 3 hours later, in a shoebox that had been shoved to the very back of a high shelf. Inside was a VHS tape in a clear plastic case, labeled in Lorraine's careful handwriting, Summer 1983. Hennie held the tape carefully, her throat tight. She had no way to watch it at her camp. No electricity, no television, no VHS player. But Tom would have access to those things at the sheriff's station. She locked up the unit and hiked back to town, the tape secure in her rucksack. She found Tom at the station doing paperwork at his desk. When she showed him what she'd found, his eyebrows rose. You want to watch this now? He asked. I need to know what's on it. He made some calls, borrowed an old VHS player from the evidence room where outdated equipment went to die, and set it up in a small conference room. Hennie sat in a plastic chair, her hands gripped together in her lap, while Tom fiddled with the connections. Ready? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The screen flickered to life, showing static, then resolved into a sunny backyard scene. Hennie recognized it immediately, the yard behind the Silverton farmhouse, the dogwood tree visible in the background. The camera wobbled slightly as whoever was filming adjusted the angle. Beautiful day. Beautiful family, Lorraine's voice said from behind the camera. Warm and affectionate. The camera panned across the yard, showing a picnic table laden with food, a small inflatable pool, lawn chairs. Then it focused on Catherine. Hennie's breath caught. Her mother, alive and moving, younger than Hennie was now. Catherine wore jeans and a blue shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was smiling, but Hennie could see the strain around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. A little girl ran into frame. Hannah, maybe 8 years old, wearing a swimsuit and carrying a beach ball. She ran to Catherine, who swept her up with a laugh, spinning her around. The affection between them was palpable, genuine. Then a man entered the frame, and Hennie's whole body went rigid. James Wilder, tall, bearded, in his late 30s. He didn't approach Catherine or Hannah, just stood at the edge of the group, hands in his pockets, watching. His expression was neutral, almost blank, but something about his stillness felt threatening. Robert Carver appeared, greeting James with a handshake that looked forced. They spoke briefly, their body language stiff and uncomfortable. The camera lingered on them for a moment, then panned away to follow Hannah as she played in the pool. The footage jumped ahead, bad edit or damaged tape. Now Hannah was sitting alone on the back steps, no longer in her swimsuit, wearing a t-shirt and shorts. Her earlier energy had vanished. She looked small, quiet, her arms wrapped around her knees. Catherine came into frame, sat beside her daughter, put an arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a moment, Catherine's lips moving in words the camera couldn't quite pick up. Then Catherine carried Hannah inside, disappearing from view. James followed them a moment later, his posture aggressive, purposeful. The camera stayed on the empty yard for several seconds. Then it moved shakily toward the house. Lorraine's voice, barely audible. "God help us all." The tape went to static. Hennie sat frozen, her face wet with tears. She didn't remember starting to cry. Tom turned off the television and sat beside her, not speaking, just present. That was a month before the fire, Hennie finally managed. "I remember that day. I remember being afraid of him, not wanting to be near him. My mother took me inside because I asked her to. He was controlling her," Tom said quietly. "You can see it in the way she moves, the way she watches him. She was afraid too. Everyone was afraid of him. Even Robert, and he was trying to protect us." Hennie wiped her face roughly. "Lorraine filmed that as evidence, didn't she? She knew something was going to happen. Probably. It's smart, actually. If Catherine had gone through with the restraining order, this footage would have supported her case. It shows him as a threatening presence, shows the effect he had on both of you." Hennie stood abruptly, needing to move. "I want to find him, Tom. I want to look him in the face and ask him why. Why he killed my mother. Why he left me orphaned. Why he thought he had the right to destroy everything." Tom stood too, his expression serious. "I understand. But we do this right. We gather evidence, we build a case, and we approach him legally. Can you promise me that?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to be the kind of person who could wait patiently for justice to run its proper course. But the rage burning in her chest, the rage that had been building for 30 years without her even recognizing it, made promises difficult. "I'll try," she said. It was the best she could offer. 2 days later, Hennie was sorting through the last section of the storage unit when her fingers brushed against something unusual. The trunk she'd been examining had seemed ordinary at first. Old clothes, moth-eaten blankets, a few paperback novels. But when she lifted out the final blanket, she noticed that the trunk's interior seemed shallower than its exterior dimensions suggested. She ran her hands along the bottom, feeling for irregularities, and found a slight gap along one edge. With careful pressure, the false bottom lifted away, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside was a single large envelope, sealed with red wax that had cracked with age. Written across the front in Lorraine's unmistakable handwriting, "Open when she's ready, the whole truth." Hennie's hands trembled as she lifted it out. The envelope was thick, heavy with contents. She sat down on the trunk, the envelope in her lap, suddenly afraid of what it might contain. Her phone, a cheap prepaid model she'd bought after realizing she needed to stay in contact with Tom and Delia, buzzed with a text. "Tom, found confirmation on Jim Walker. Can you come to the station?" She texted back, "Found something important. Can you come here? Bring Delia if she's available." Within 40 minutes, both of them arrived. Delia climbed out of Tom's patrol car, moving slowly but with purpose. They found Hennie still sitting on the trunk, the envelope unopened in her hands. "I'm afraid of what's in here," Hennie admitted as they joined her. Lorraine called it the whole truth. "I don't know if I'm ready for the whole truth. You've come this far," Delia said gently. "And you're not alone anymore." Hennie nodded, drew a deep breath and broke the seal. Inside was a thick letter, written in Lorraine's hand, the paper slightly yellowed but the ink still clear. Beneath it were additional documents, legal papers, photographs, and what looked like investigator reports. Hennie unfolded the letter and began to read aloud, her voice shaking but steady. "My dearest Hannah," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've finally come looking for the answers I never had the courage to give you while I was alive. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for so many things. But most of all, I'm sorry that I let you grow up believing your mother's death was an accident. It wasn't." Hennie paused, swallowed hard, and continued. "The fire that killed Catherine was deliberately set by James Wilder. Your father? I know because I was there. Robert and I both were. We'd come that evening because Catherine had called us. terrified. James had found out she was planning to leave the state with you, to disappear where he couldn't find you. He'd shown up at the house enraged, threatening. We got there as fast as we could. Catherine had already gotten you outside when we arrived. She'd put you in Robert's truck and told you to wait there, to lock the doors, to stay safe. Then she went back inside to gather some final things. Documents, money, your birth certificate. She was going to leave that very night. James was waiting inside. We heard them arguing, heard Catherine screaming. Robert and I ran in. James had her cornered in the bedroom, blocking the door. He'd already locked it from the inside. We could hear Catherine begging him to let her out, to just let her go. Robert and I broke down the door, but by then smoke was already pouring from the kitchen. James had started the fire before cornering Catherine, intending to trap her. The kitchen was already engulfed when we got to her. She'd been overcome by smoke, was barely conscious. We carried her out, tried to revive her, but she was already gone. James had fled out the back while we were focused on Catherine. We never saw him leave, but when we looked, he'd vanished. His truck was gone. He'd left his wife to die and his daughter orphaned, and he'd just driven away. Robert and I faced an impossible choice. We could tell the police the truth, that James had committed murder. But you were the only other witness, and you were 12 years old and traumatized. Your testimony alone wouldn't be enough to convict him. He would walk free, and then he'd come looking for you. We knew he would. Men like James don't let go easily, or we could protect you. We could lie to the investigators, tell them we'd arrived after the fire started, that we'd found you outside alone. We could let them rule it accidental. We could hide you in the foster system under your mother's maiden name, make you as untraceable as possible, and hope James never found you. We chose to protect you. Robert used his connections to influence the investigation. I placed you in foster care under Catherine's name, Madsen. We erased James from the story entirely, but James didn't disappear forever. He contacted me in 1991 demanding money. He said if I didn't pay him, he'd find you. He'd make sure you knew what really happened that night, and he'd make you choose whether to turn him in or protect him. He wanted to use you as leverage, as insurance against ever being caught. I paid him. I continued paying him for years, sending money to various addresses he provided, always under threat that he'd come for you if I stopped. I hired private investigators to track him, to make sure he stayed away from you. And I stored everything, every piece of evidence, every report, every document that proved what he'd done in this unit. I set up a trust before my death to ensure this storage unit would eventually find its way to you. The charity raffle was the mechanism. I couldn't control when you'd win it, but I knew if you were still in the area, still using your assumed name Hennie Chalk, eventually the universe would bring you back to these truths. Hannah, my darling girl, you deserve to know. Your mother died protecting you. She loved you more than her own life, and she fought to keep you safe until her very last breath. I failed her by not protecting you better afterward, by scattering you through the foster system, by letting you become so lost that even I couldn't find you, but I saved the truth. And now it's yours to do with as you see fit. James Wilder murdered your mother. He extorted money from me for years. He's lived free while you've lived in hiding. The private investigator reports are attached. The last known location was northern Idaho, 2001. He may still be there. He may have moved on, but the truth of what he did remains unchanged. End this story your way, Hannah. Find your peace, and know that Catherine's last words were your name. She died trying to get back to you. She died loving you. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I chose silence over justice. I hope you can forgive me. With all my love, Aunt Lorraine. Hennie's voice had faded to barely a whisper by the end. She lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face unchecked. Delia had her hand pressed to her mouth, her own eyes wet. Tom's jaw was set tight, his expression thunderous. He murdered her, Hennie said, her voice breaking. He locked her in that room and set the house on fire. And then he walked away. Tom picked up the additional documents, flipping through them quickly. These investigator reports, they track him for a decade. Last location was Coeur d'Alene, 2001, working at a lumberyard under an alias. He looked up at Hennie. That's about 40 miles from Bonner's Ferry, where Jim Walker is working now. The final piece clicked into place in Hennie's mind. It's him. Jim Walker is James Wilder. He's been in northern Idaho this whole time, and so have you, Delia said softly. For 23 years you've been in the same region. A horrible thought struck Hennie. What if he's known? What if he tracked me here, has been watching me all this time? We don't know that, Tom said firmly. Don't jump to conclusions. But we do need to find out. He gathered the documents carefully. This is evidence, Hennie. Real substantial evidence of murder, of arson, of extortion. With this and the VHS tape, we have enough to reopen the investigation. We have enough to arrest him. Hennie stood, her legs unsteady. She walked to the entrance of the unit, staring out at the afternoon light. Somewhere out there, maybe just 40 miles away, her father was going about his day. Working, eating, sleeping, living a life he'd stolen by murdering her mother. I need to see him, she said. Before you arrest him, before this becomes official, I need to look him in the face and tell him I know what he did. Hennie, Tom began, I need this. Tom, I've spent my entire adult life running from shadows. I need to face the real thing. I need to stop being afraid. Tom and Delia exchanged glances. Finally, Tom nodded slowly. All right, but we do it my way. Official capacity with backup close by. You don't go near him alone under any circumstances. Agreed? Agreed. Delia stepped forward, pulling Hennie into an unexpected hug. Your mother would be proud of you, she whispered. You're finishing what she started. As the sun set over Timber Ridge, Hennie stood in the doorway of the storage unit, holding her mother's letter and preparing herself for the confrontation that had been 30 years in the making. James Wilder had taken everything from her, her mother, her childhood, her sense of safety in the world. It was time to take her power back. Hennie spent that night at her camp, but sleep was impossible. She lay in her bedroll under the tarp, staring up at the stars, visible through the pine branches, her mind racing. Tomorrow, Tom was going to take her to Bonner's Ferry. Tomorrow, she would come face to face with the man who'd murdered her mother and abandoned her to a life of fear and isolation. She tried to imagine what she'd say to him, tried to rehearse the words that would convey 30 years of grief and rage and loss. But every mental script felt inadequate. How did you condense a lifetime of pain into a conversation? How did you make someone understand the weight of what they'd stolen? As dawn broke, she packed up her camp with unusual care, as if preparing for a journey she might not return from. She tucked Catherine's photograph into her jacket pocket, along with the music box. Talismans, reminders of why she was doing this. Tom picked her up at the general store at 8 in the morning. Delia was already in the vehicle, insisting she come along despite Tom's initial protests. I've been part of this from the beginning, Delia had said firmly. I'm not sitting home while you two drive off to confront a murderer. They drove north in silence, the landscape shifting from the familiar forests around Timber Ridge to the broader valleys and higher peaks near Bonner's Ferry. The logging operation was about 15 miles outside town, accessible only by a rough gravel road that wound through dense timber. Tom had done his research. The operation was small, independent, mostly employing older men who appreciated the cash work and minimal oversight. The owner, a man named Dale, was known for asking few questions and respecting his workers' privacy. It was exactly the kind of place where someone with a past could disappear. I called ahead, Tom said as they navigated the rutted road. Told Dale I needed to do a welfare check on one of his employees. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed to let us on site. What's our approach? Hennie asked. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. We find him, I identify myself as law enforcement, and I ask him some questions. You stay back unless I indicate it's safe to approach. There's a deputy from Bonner's Ferry meeting us there as backup, just in case things go sideways. You think he'll run? I think men who've been hiding for 30 years don't typically welcome police attention. We need to be ready for anything. The logging operation appeared around a bend in the road, a cleared area with several trucks, a small office trailer, stacks of lumber, and the constant sound of saws and heavy machinery. Dale, a barrel-chested man in his 60s, met them at the entrance, his expression wary. "Deputy Farrell?" he asked, shaking Tom's hand. "Walker's over by the tool shed doing maintenance. Haven't told him you're here yet, thank you. We'll try to be quick and minimize disruption. Appreciate it. Walker's a good worker. Whatever this is about, I hope it's nothing serious." Tom didn't respond to that, just gestured for Hennie and Delia to follow him. The deputy from Bonner's Ferry, a young woman named Collins, joined them, her hand resting casually near her radio. They walked across the worksite, drawing curious glances from the crew. Hennie's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every step brought her closer to a moment she'd both craved and dreaded for most of her life. The tool shed was a weathered structure at the edge of the clearing. A man was bent over a chainsaw, his back to them, his movements methodical and practiced. He wore work clothes stained with sawdust and tree sap, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. "Jim Walker?" Tom called out. The man stiffened. He set down the chainsaw slowly, carefully, before turning around. Hennie's breath stopped in her chest. Even aged, even weathered by years of outdoor work, even with gray hair and deeper lines around his eyes, she knew him, would have known him anywhere. The shape of his face, the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself with a kind of coiled watchfulness. James Wilder. Her father. His eyes moved from Tom's uniform to Hennie's face, and in that instant she saw recognition flare in his expression. He knew exactly who she was. "Hannah May," he said, his voice rough from disuse or emotion or both. "You look like your mother." The words hit her like a physical blow. She steadied herself against Tom's arm, forcing herself to stay upright, to keep breathing. "My name is Hennie," she managed. "Hannah died in that fire with my mother." Something flickered across James's face. Pain, maybe, or regret. But it was quickly replaced by a defensive hardness that she remembered from childhood. His walls going up, his armor sliding into place. "Mr. Walker," Tom said formally. "Or should I say Mr. Wilder? I'm Deputy Tom Farrell from Timber Ridge. I need to ask you some questions about a fire in Silverton, Oregon, August 1983. James's expression went carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. Catherine Madsen died in that fire. You were her ex-husband. You were at the scene." "That was ruled an accident," James said, his voice flat. "I read about it in the papers. Terrible tragedy." Hennie found her voice, stronger now, fueled by anger. "You locked her in that bedroom. You started the fire in the kitchen and you trapped her. My aunt saw you. Robert saw you." "I saw you." James's eyes snapped to hers, something desperate appearing behind the hardness. "You were 12 years old. You couldn't have seen anything clearly. I saw enough. I saw you at the house. I saw the flames. I saw you look at me before you drove away and left me there." Her hands were shaking, but she didn't care. "I remember, Dad. I remember everything." The word Dad came out bitter, acidic. James flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Hannah," he started, "don't call me that. You gave up the right to call me that when you murdered my mother." Tom stepped slightly between them, his posture protective. "Mr. Wilder, we have new evidence regarding the fire. Witness statements, physical evidence, and testimony that contradicts the original investigation's conclusions. I need you to come with me to the station to answer some questions." James's jaw clenched. "I don't have to go anywhere with you. Actually, you do. I can do this the easy way or the hard way, but you are coming with me." Tom's hand moved to his belt, near his handcuffs. For a moment, Hennie thought James might run. She saw him calculating, measuring distances, considering options. But Deputy Collins had moved to block the path back toward the main road, and Dale and several workers had gathered at a distance. Watching, James was trapped. "I want a lawyer," he said finally. "That's your right. But first, we're going to have a conversation." Tom nodded to Collins, who moved forward with handcuffs. "Is that necessary?" James asked, his voice tight. "For a murder suspect?" Yes, the word murder hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the watching workers murmured, shocked. Dale's face had gone pale. James Wilder, Jim Walker, had just been exposed in front of everyone he'd worked with for 6 years. As Collins secured the handcuffs, James looked at Hennie one more time. "I never meant for it to go that way," he said quietly. I never meant for her to die. Hennie felt Delia's hand on her shoulder, grounding her. She met her father's eyes and saw him clearly for the first time in her life, not as the terrifying figure from her childhood memories, but as what he really was. A small, broken man who destroyed everything good in his life and then spent 3 decades running from the consequences. You locked her in a burning room, Hennie said, her voice clear and cold. You knew exactly what would happen. You meant every bit of it. James opened his mouth to respond, but Tom cut him off. Save it for your lawyer. Let's go. They walked back across the work site, James in handcuffs between Tom and Collins, Hennie and Delia following behind. Workers stopped what they were doing to watch, the sound of machinery falling silent as they passed. It felt surreal, dreamlike, as if Hennie were watching herself from a distance. At the vehicles, Tom paused to speak with Dale, explaining that Jim Walker was wanted in connection with a decades-old murder case. Dale looked stunned, betrayed. He seemed like such a quiet guy, he kept saying. Just kept to himself, did his work. That's what they do, Tom said simply. They hide in plain sight. Collins took James in her patrol car, heading back to Bonner's Ferry to book him. Tom, Hennie and Delia climbed into Tom's vehicle, and for a long moment no one spoke. Finally, Delia reached forward from the back seat and squeezed Hennie's shoulder. You did it. You faced him. I did, Hennie said, and she realized with surprise that her hands had stopped shaking. The fear that had lived in her body for as long as she could remember had loosened its grip. She'd looked her monster in the face, and he'd been smaller than she expected. Just a man. Just a guilty, frightened man. What happens now? She asked Tom. Now I take you home and then I start the official process. I'll coordinate with Oregon authorities, transfer all the evidence we've gathered, work with the prosecutor to build a case. He glanced at her. You'll have to testify eventually. You know that, right? I know. I'm ready. And the surprising thing was, she meant it. For the first time in her adult life, she was ready to tell her story, ready to speak the truth out loud, in a courtroom, under oath, ready to make sure her mother's death meant something. As they drove back toward Timber Ridge, Hennie watched the landscape roll past. The same forest she'd been hiding in for 23 years. But they looked different now. Less like shelter and more like home. Less like a place to disappear, and more like a place to finally, truly live. She pulled out Catherine's photograph, studying her mother's young face. I did it, Mama, she whispered. I found him. I faced him. And I'm going to make sure he answers for what he did to you. The photograph, of course, didn't respond, but somehow Hennie felt like her mother was listening. The formal confrontation happened 2 days later in an interrogation room at the Bonner's Ferry Sheriff's Station. James had been held on suspicion of arson and murder, denied bail due to flight risk. His public defender, a weary-looking woman named Patricia Morse, sat beside him. Her briefcase open and her expression professionally neutral. Hennie sat in an observation room with Delia, watching through one-way glass as Tom and a detective from the Oregon State Police questioned James. She'd been given the option to be there or to stay away, and she'd chosen to witness. She needed to hear him admit what he'd done, needed to hear the truth spoken aloud. Tom began with the formalities, reading James his rights again, confirming he understood them, establishing the date and time for the record. Then he laid out the evidence methodically. The VHS tape showing James's threatening presence at the house a month before the fire. The restraining order Catherine had drafted. The fire marshal's preliminary notes mentioning multiple points of origin and the smell of accelerant. Lorraine's letter detailing exactly what had happened that night. James sat rigid through it all, his face expressionless, his hands folded on the table in front of him. Only his eyes moved, tracking each piece of evidence as it was presented. The official report said the fire was accidental, James finally said. Electrical fault. The official report was inaccurate, the Oregon detective said flatly. We've reviewed the original evidence and conducted new interviews. We know Robert Carver and Lorraine Madsen influenced the investigation to protect the victim's daughter. We know they lied about when they arrived at the scene. And we know you were there when the fire started. You can't prove that. Actually, we can. Hannah Wilder, now Hennie Chalk, remembers seeing you there. She gave a statement to Child Protective Services 2 days after the fire, saying her father was present. That statement was dismissed at the time because she was considered an unreliable witness due to trauma, but corroborated with the other evidence, it becomes credible. James's lawyer leaned in, whispered something to him. He shook his head, jaw tight. Tom slid a photograph across the table, a still frame from the VHS tape, showing James standing in the yard, his posture aggressive, his expression dark. This is you, a month before the fire. Witnesses reported that Catherine was afraid of you, that you'd been harassing her despite the divorce being final. This establishes motive and intent. That's circumstantial, the lawyer said. Maybe. But combined with everything else, it's enough. Tom leaned forward, his voice hardening. Here's what we know happened, Mr. Wilder. Catherine was planning to leave the state with Hannah. You found out. You went to the house on August 15, 1983, and confronted her. An argument ensued. You locked Catherine in the bedroom and started a fire in the kitchen, intending to trap her. Lorraine Madsen and Robert Carver arrived and broke down the bedroom door. But by then, Catherine had already succumbed to smoke inhalation. You fled the scene, leaving your daughter orphaned. In the observation room, Hennie's hands gripped the edge of the table. Hearing it laid out so plainly, so factually, made it more real than any memory. James was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, broken in a way that reminded Hennie uncomfortably of how he'd sounded when she was small, and he'd apologized after one of his rages. It was an accident, he said. I didn't mean for the fire to spread that fast. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, trying to stop him, but he shook her off. Catherine was leaving, taking my daughter where I'd never see her again. I just wanted to talk to her, make her understand that we could work it out. But she wouldn't listen. She never listened. His voice rose with old anger, then dropped again. We argued. She said things, cruel things about me being a failure, about Hannah being better off without me. I lost my temper. I pushed her. She fell, hit her head on the bed frame. Hennie's breath caught. Her mother had been hurt before the fire even started. I panicked, James continued, his words coming faster now, spilling out like a confession he'd been holding for decades. I thought she was unconscious, maybe dead. I didn't know what to do. I went to the kitchen, tried to think. And then, I don't know, something in me just snapped. If I couldn't have her, if I couldn't have my family, then what was the point? I turned on the stove, left some towels near the burners. I went back to the bedroom, locked the door. I thought maybe it would look like an accident. You thought you'd get away with murder, Tom said flatly. I thought she was already dead. James's voice cracked. I thought the fire would just cover it up, make it look like an accident. I didn't know Lorraine and Robert were coming. I didn't know Hannah was still there, watching. I just panicked and ran. His lawyer had her head in her hands, recognizing that her client had just confessed to everything on tape. Hennie stood abruptly, needing to leave the observation room, needing air. Delia followed her out into the hallway, where Hennie leaned against the wall, breathing hard. He admitted it, Hennie said. He actually admitted it. He did, Delia confirmed gently. It's over, Hennie. He can't run any more. But Hennie shook her head. It wasn't over, not yet. She needed to tell him one more thing, needed him to understand what his actions had cost. She needed him to see her, really see her, as the person she'd become despite him. She walked back into the observation room, knocked on the glass. Tom looked up, saw her, and after a moment's hesitation, nodded. He came out into the hallway. I need to speak to him, Hennie said. Just for a minute. Face to face. Tom studied her carefully. Are you sure? I'm sure. They arranged it carefully. Hennie would sit across from James, with Tom present, the conversation recorded. She wouldn't be alone with him. She wouldn't be in danger. But she'd get her moment to speak her truth directly to the man who'd stolen her childhood. James looked up when she entered, his expression shifting from resignation to something more complicated. Shame, maybe, or regret. He started to stand, but Tom gestured for him to remain seated. Hennie sat down, her hands folded on the table between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She studied his face, looking for traces of the father she'd once known. But that person seemed gone, replaced by this tired, defeated stranger. "Do you remember teaching me to ride a bike?" she asked suddenly. James blinked, surprised by the question. "What? I was 6. You took me to the park, ran beside me, held the back of the seat. You were patient. You didn't yell when I fell. Do you remember that?" Yes, I remember. That's the only good memory I have of you. The only time I felt safe with you." Hennie's voice remained steady, calm. "Every other memory is fear." Your voice raised. "Mama crying. Hiding in my closet with my hands over my ears, waiting for the storm to pass." James's face crumpled. "Hannah, my name is Hennie. Hannah died the night you killed my mother. The girl who could have had a father, who could have grown up in a real home, who could have become a teacher like her mama. That girl died in that fire too." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what you did? Not just to Mama, but to me. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did. You hurt me every day of my life. You made me afraid of everything, of people, of relationships, of having a home. I spent 23 years living in the woods because I couldn't trust the world. Because you taught me that the people who were supposed to love me were the most dangerous of all." James's hands trembled on the table. "I'm sorry. God, Hannah, Hennie, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't give me back the life I should have had." Hennie pulled out the photograph from her pocket, the one that had started this entire journey, and placed it on the table between them. "This is who I was supposed to be. A little girl who felt safe, who trusted her parents, who grew up normal and whole." James stared at the photograph, his eyes filling with tears. "She loved you so much. Catherine loved you more than anything. I know she did. That's why she died, trying to protect me from you. And you repaid her love by locking her in a burning room." Hennie's voice hardened. "You don't get to cry about this. You don't get to play the victim. You made choices. You chose violence. You chose murder. You chose to leave me alone. I couldn't face what I'd done," James whispered. "I couldn't look at you and see Catherine's eyes and know that you'd murdered her. Say it. Say what you did." James's face contorted with grief and shame. "I murdered her. I killed Catherine. I destroyed our family. And I ran because I was a coward." Hennie felt something release in her chest, a knot that had been there so long she'd stopped noticing it. Hearing him admit it, seeing him broken and defeated, didn't bring the satisfaction she'd thought it would. But it brought something else. Closure, truth, the end of the story that had been defining her life without her consent. "You know what the worst part is?" she said quietly. "For years I blamed myself. I thought maybe if I'd been better, quieter, easier, maybe you wouldn't have been so angry all the time. Maybe Mama wouldn't have needed to leave. Maybe she'd still be alive." "No," James said, leaning forward urgently. "No, Hennie. None of this was your fault. You were a child. You were innocent. This was all me, my anger, my weakness, my failure. Don't carry that burden. I'm not. Not anymore." Hennie stood, picking up the photograph. "I came here to tell you that I remember everything now. I remember the good and the bad and the terrible. And I'm going to testify against you. I'm going to tell the court exactly what I saw, what I experienced, what you took from me. And then I'm going to walk out of here and build the life Mama wanted me to have." She turned toward the door, then paused, looking back one final time. "My mother's name was Catherine. She was kind and brave, and she died trying to save me from you. I'm going to make sure everyone knows that. I'm going to make sure her story is told. Hennie, goodbye, James." She walked out, leaving him sitting in the interrogation room with his lawyer and his guilt and the weight of 30 years of running finally catching up to him. Tom followed her into the hallway where Delia was waiting. "You all right?" Tom asked gently. Hennie nodded, surprised to find that she meant it. "I am. For the first time in my whole life, I really am." The three of them walked out of the station together into the late afternoon sunshine. Hennie paused on the steps, tilting her face up to the warmth, breathing deeply. She'd faced her monster. She'd spoken her truth, and she'd survived. Now, finally, she could begin to live. Spring came early to Timber Ridge that year, arriving in a rush of green and birdsong and warming air. Hennie stood on the porch of her small cabin, rented, but the first permanent home she'd had in decades, and watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold. A coffee cup warmed her hands, steam rising in the cool morning air. 3 months had passed since James Wilder's arrest. 3 months of legal proceedings, of giving testimony, of working with prosecutors to build an airtight case. The trial was scheduled for June, but James's lawyer had already indicated he would likely accept a plea deal. Manslaughter, arson, and various lesser charges. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison, which seemed both just and insufficient, but Hennie had made peace with that. Justice wasn't about revenge or satisfaction. It was about truth, about accountability, about making sure Catherine's death meant something. The cabin sat on the edge of town, close enough to walk to the general store, but far enough to feel private. It had 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a living room with a wood stove, and this porch that looked toward the mountains. After viewing it with Tom's help, Hennie had known immediately it was right. Not too big, not too isolated. A place to heal, to rebuild, to become the person she might have been if the fire had never happened. She heard a vehicle approaching and smiled. Tom's patrol car appeared around the bend, pulling into her small driveway. He climbed out, carrying a box from the bakery in town. "Morning," he called. "Brought breakfast. Delia's coming by in an hour. She found something else she wants to show you. More documents." Hennie asked, opening the door to let him in. "Probably. That woman never stops researching." Tom set the pastries on the kitchen table, which Hennie had found at a yard sale, and refinished herself. Learning to do things like that, domestic things, settling things, had been part of her healing process. They ate breakfast together, talking about ordinary things. Tom's nephew's baseball game. The new family moving into the house on Maple Street. Gus's plans to expand the general store. Normal conversation, the kind Hennie had never had before. The kind that made her feel connected to the world, rather than hiding from it. When Delia arrived, she brought not documents, but a small wooden box, handcrafted and beautiful. "I made something for you," she said, settling into the chair Hennie offered. "Well, Tom helped with the carpentry, but the design was mine." Hennie opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was soil, dark, rich earth. "It's from Catherine's grave," Delia explained gently. "I took a trip to Silverton last month, visited the cemetery. I thought you might want a piece of her here with you." Hennie's eyes burned with tears, but they were the kind that healed rather than hurt. "Thank you." Thank you. There's more." Delia pulled out a small paper packet. "Seeds from a dogwood tree, just like the one in your photograph. I thought maybe you could plant them here, create a living memorial." That afternoon, with Tom and Delia's help, Hennie planted the first dogwood seed in her small yard. They dug the hole together, mixed Catherine's grave soil with Timber Ridge earth, and settled the seed carefully in its new home. "It'll take years to grow," Delia said. "Dogwoods are patient trees." "That's all right," Hennie replied. "I'm not going anywhere," and she meant it. For the first time since she was 12 years old, she had roots. She had a home. She had people who cared about her, and whom she cared about in return. The storage unit had been emptied finally, its contents either donated to the Historical Society, kept for personal value, or respectfully discarded. Hennie had kept Catherine's diary, the music box, the photographs, and Lorraine's letter. Everything else, the furniture, the clothes, the accumulated debris of a life interrupted, had been released. She'd also kept something unexpected. Robert Carver had reached out through his nursing home, asking if she'd visit. She'd gone, uncertain what to expect, and found a frail man in his late 80s who wept when he saw her. "I'm sorry," he'd said over and over. "I thought we were protecting you. I thought we were doing the right thing." And Hennie, to her own surprise, had forgiven him. "You gave my mother a safe place to live. You tried to help her. And you kept the truth preserved until I was ready for it." That took courage. She visited him monthly now, bringing stories of her new life, of the town they both loved, of the healing she was finally allowing herself to experience. Hennie had also enrolled in community college classes, considering what Delia had suggested. Maybe teaching nature skills, environmental education, sharing the wilderness knowledge she'd accumulated through decades of survival. The idea of teaching felt right, like honoring Catherine's legacy in a tangible way. As evening approached and her friends departed, Hennie stood alone in her yard, looking at the freshly turned earth where the dogwood seed lay buried. She pulled out Catherine's photograph, the one that had started everything, and studied her mother's young face. "I did it, Mama," she said softly. "I found the truth. I faced him, and I'm building the life you wanted for me. I'm not running anymore." The mountains stood silent witness, the same mountains she'd hidden in for so long. But they felt different now. Not like a fortress keeping the world out, but like home embracing her, holding her, promising that she belonged. Hennie Chalk, Hannah Mae Wilder, had spent most of her life disappearing. Now finally she was learning to be seen, to be known, to be present in her own story, and it turned out that being found was so much better than staying lost. She walked back to her cabin as the stars began appearing overhead one by one, lighting the way home.